Jews claim that Christians misinterpret the prophets, but what if the prophets are just false prophets? After all, a false prophet is a prophet who says the one thing and what does not come true. Consider Ezekiel 29, verse 8 till 12. Egypt would be a barren wasteland, and that has never been happened. Besides, the person says, Rabbi Tovia Singer himself claims that Isaiah is 19% poetic, so then you can make of it anything you want. And he's recalling to the video, who is the suffering servant. So then why should we believe the explanation about false prophets? Let's just stick to the words of Jesus, that's safer.
Okay. All right. The Ezekiel 29 is a very specific prophecy, not about the utter destruction of Egypt forever, but the destruction of Egypt or the conquering of Egypt. And in the same chapter, if you just keep reading from verse 17, that means you stopped too early. You stopped at verse 12. Well, if you move on, you'll see that, in fact, the Babylonian Empire, which happened, in fact, captured Egypt, and for 40 years, Egypt lost its sovereignty and never was restored back to the great height that it once held. And which is really startling, because Egypt was a very valuable place in that Egypt is in a desert, does not require rain and doesn't get any rain, but it has a unlimited supply of water from the Nile. Moreover, in the ancient world, you did not transport things over ground. You could, but it was not practical. Through camels, you could, but it was everything moved by ship. So whoever had access to the Mediterranean and who had food could become very powerful and very wealthy. And that's why it was very important in the ancient world to control Egypt. So as an example, the Persian Empire at some times controlled Egypt. The Babylonian Empire controlled Egypt. It was the Roman Empire controlled. Whoever controls Egypt really controls the ideal perfect place, because if you're going to get food from Egypt to other parts of the empire, well, the way you moved it was by ship. Well, Egypt has this unique, huge aperture as water all over, as the Mediterranean, has the Red Sea. I mean, one of the problems that Iraq had, not the only, but one of the problems Saddam Hussein had and invaded Kuwait, part of it was that Iraq, while having a lot of oil, had a very small aperture to get its oil out to the water to get on a tanker, because it's not practical to use a pipeline, but really the practical thing is to use a tanker. And gaining Kuwait would give them, Kuwait is just sitting right on the water. So, in fact, Babylon does capture Egypt. It's prophesied in that same chapter. Now let's go back to Isaiah 53 in the general point I was conveying, which is very important to keep in mind. The book of Isaiah is more than 90% poetry. Poetry means it's not using standard prose. It's highly dense symbolic language. It's not very difficult, but it's not that easy. It reads nothing like the book of Joshua or Judges, which contain almost no poetry at all. So you could, when reading the book of Judges, read a chapter which talks about Manoach and his wife having the baby Samson, and you could read it out of context and get the story. You could read about Gideon out of context and get the story, because it's not poetry, and each story is separate. It's not that you should do it, but you can get a sense of what's going on. Yiftach, get a sense of what's going on. Isaiah is poetry, and Isaiah therefore is using symbolic language. In our case, Isaiah is telling us in Isaiah 41, verse 8 and 9, and 44, 1, 21, 45, 4, 48, 20, 49, 3, that a servant is Israel. So by the time you get to 53, the prophet anticipates that you know who the servant is. So Ezekiel 29 is very, very clear about what happens to Egypt, who subjugates Egypt, and that happened historically. When I say that Isaiah is poetry, what I mean is that therefore, there's a therefore there, you must know the context or you will have no clue what the prophet is speaking about. Again, in contrast, Leviticus 11. If you want to know what animals are clean and unclean, you could look at Leviticus 11, right? That's where it lists it all out. And you can read Leviticus 11 out of context. You can get away with it. Why? Because it's a separate section that tells us how to identify clean and unclean animals. There's no poetry there. It's just next section. Isaiah, it can't be. And this, unfortunately, has tripped up, caused many Christians to go astray because they're not reading Isaiah 51, 49, 45. They're not reading them. So they have no idea what the context of Isaiah 53 is. And the poetry means that without the context, you have no clue what's going on. Thank you for your question.